70s and retrospect videos, my shows. My channel is now being named Fort Lauderdale 1, and my new title of my show is going to be Gold TA 70s Chick, due to my love of gold Trans Ams, and being that I am all about 70s culture, music, fads, news, folklore, and so on and so forth. I'm glad you can join me on this last rendition, and it's a very, very big year, a lot of newsworthy events. The first one was, of course, huge near the end of 1979. It lasted from November 1979 to January of 1981. And of course, that was the Iranian Hostage Crisis. Now, this was sort of a standoff between US and Iran. And Jimmy Carter, who was the president at the time, referred to it as a blackmail, which really was in retrospect, and given the events, it was blackmail. But in Iran, they saw it as an act against the US and its influence in Iran, and including its perceived attempts to undermine the Iranian Revolution and its longstanding support of the Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who was overthrown in February 1979. And the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini urged his people to demonstrate on November 4th and expand the attacks on US and Israeli interests. The crisis began on November 4th with the takedown of a total of 90 hostages, and 53 of them who were American, and demand that the US send back the former Shah of Iran for crimes that he committed, which forced him to be overthrown in February of 1979. In response to this crisis, Jimmy Carter ordered a halt to all oil imports in the US by Iran, along with freezing all of Iranian assets in US banks. Total number of days that the hostages were held were 444 days, and they were being released on January 20th, 1981, while Ronald Reagan was being sworn in as president. Yes, this was quite a shock for Americans, and it was an ongoing. Y100, which was a radio station here in Florida, had dedicated to the Iranian hostage. It was the Iranian Hostage Freedom Week, and the slogan was "Let our people go." And the funny thing was, everywhere there was shirts and bumper stickers. One of the bumper stickers was all in caps, and it was all the words were all saved together, and it said "Shit on Iran," and the other one was "Fuck Iran." And there was shirts with Mickey Mouse on it saying, "Hey, Iran." So there was all kinds of, oh my God, it was, what a man. That was, I remember that, of course, plain as day. I was just starting 6th grade, and I remember I did not a book report, but a presentation where you go on cards and you write all your notes down, and everyone loved it. So, and I said something about, God, can you imagine to have all those Iranians around you? Thanks, Dina. I'm glad you can come on. I'm hoping, I told Lee that I was going on in 10 minutes, so hopefully he didn't get sidetracked. And my English friend, Lady Peeps, she's also on those shows with Lee that I go on every Saturday. She's adorable. I just love her. She's fantastic. She's such a hoot. Anyway, along with that, there was also the gas shortage in the summer of 1979. And it turns out, from what I've heard from a reliable source, that this was actually fake, that Congress started a lawsuit in 1990 about the shortage that 7 oil companies had faked. So this was quite an eye-opener. I had no idea. All I knew is that there was a gas shortage, and during that time, a British group that Lady Peeps would know about, it was called the Barra Knights. They were a singing group in England, and they did a parody of Supertramp's Logical song. They called it the Topical Song, and it was about the gas shortage, and it's actually on YouTube. You can check that out. I remember hearing that, and yeah, they did a good job on that novelty song. So yeah, 1979, another newsworthy issue. Well, not huge newsworthy, but the British punk band, the Sex Pistols, their bass player, Sid Vicious, died of an overdose after he was only 21. He would have been 22 in May. And this was in February or March. I think it might have been February. And he did a 55-day sentence in Rikers Island for the death of his girlfriend, Nancy Spungen. And upon returning, his mother, Ann Beverly, she shot up heroin with him during the times he was in the Sex Pistols. Of course, just about everybody had a heroin addiction back then, heroin or coke, and heroin was rampant around the jazz group, the jazz culture. Anyway, he died of a heroin overdose the very next day after he was let out of the sentence that he served. So that was, I never knew who the Sex Pistols were, but I remember reading about them in, was it not People? Well, it might have been People magazine. And I'm thinking, wow, God, who are these people? They're bad people. Oh, my goodness. And this was, of course, before I got into rock and roll. I was a disco. Hey, Lee, there you are. I just got done speaking about the Iranian hostage crisis and the fake oil shortage. And I just reported the Sex Pistols bass player Sid Vicious and his death, heroin overdose. And it was after he was let out, right after he was let out of his sentence. He did in Rikers Island for 55 days of death of his girlfriend, or the murder of his girlfriend. And another, pardon me, I got to take a sip of water here. And another big news issue was the 11 deaths in the Who concert on December 3rd, 1979 in Cincinnati at the, it was the Coliseum, Riverfront Coliseum, and it's now the Heritage Bank Center as of today. Yes, what happened was there was festival seating being run in the Coliseum, where you just buy your tickets and you just go in and sit wherever you want. So of course there was a huge crowd forming at the front, and all the doors were closed, and the show was running behind schedule. So of course the crowd became very unruly and agitated and impatient. And at 7 p.m., the band took a late sound check, and a few of the crowd members assumed the concert was beginning. So of course the two doors that opened, they rushed through the doors, and as a result, several people were being trampled on, and there was 26 that were fatally injured, and 11 people died from the asphyxiation. And the very next day, actually, the incident was reported to the band right after the concert, of course. And then Pete Townsend was being interviewed, CBS with Walter Cronkite, I think it was the very next day, I think before the show in Buffalo. And he says that it's almost like sporting events, any kind of high tension events. And that's an understatement. But Walter Cronkite blamed it on a drug-crazed mobs of kids and the festival seating. But being that was festival seating was part of the reason for the crowd rushing in to get the best seats, festival seating was discontinued from then on. And the very next show that they did in Buffalo, New York, Roger Daltrey dedicated that show to the 11 victims. And in 1983, there was class action lawsuits were being filed by against the promoter, who was Electric Factory Concerts. And the lawsuits were settled in 1983, and each family members that were killed. Let me take a break here. I'm sorry, everybody. I got another dry mouth here. But anyway, the families of the 11 victims that died of asphyxiation due to that concert were all awarded each $150,000, which is equivalent to $385,000 today. One family opted out and just settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. And of the 26 the families of the 26 that were injured all were awarded approximately $750,000, which would equivalent to $1,925 today. Well, 1,925,000, excuse me. And they were to be divided among the family members of those 26 injured. So there were a lot of big newsworthy events of 1979. And as far as TV shows, moving on to TV shows, of course, the top TV show and my favorite was The Dukes of Hazzard. And I was first in love with Bo Duke, John Schneider, and then afterward, Tom Wopat was my man, Luke Duke. And from what I know now in recent years, he's like a crotchety, miserable old man who was arrested on drug charges, sexual harassment charges. So yeah, he's a bitter old man. And of course, Catherine Bach, Daisy, was like, it was every man's fantasy. She was just the chick that you wanted to be. I mean, she had those, what were in vogue at the time, candies, those high heel disco type shoes. They were clogs. They weren't really clogs. They were kind of clog material, but they were more disco styled. And Daisy Dukes later on in the 90s became popular, and they were named after her short shorts. And she was known for the short shorts and her legs and her flowing hair. I have hair similar to her. It was just flowing and nice. And she's also a fellow Pisces, Dana. Birthday was March 1st, 1954. She had that long flowing hair. And even though she talked like a Southern belle, usually when you heard her talk, not so much on the show, she was born and raised in Ohio, but a lot of Ohio people have a lot of those redneck accents. So, but yeah, that was one of the best shows. And Catherine Bach today, Daisy, she still looks pretty, but you know, she's just, we all get old. She's put on a lot of weight, but she's still a beautiful woman. But Tom Wopat is a miserable old man, I hate to say, but and of course the other TV shows were BJ and the Bear that I watched and I kind of grew away from, and Dukes of Hazzard was my favorite because I thought BJ and the Bear, I thought BJ was he was a real prick. I thought just really, yeah, you know, just oh god, him, and of course his friend was a monkey. Go figure. So anyway, yeah, the TV shows, and also Three's Company was still on, and then Different Strokes, of course, was popular near the end of 1979, and that started the catchphrase of "What you talk about, Willis," from Gary Coleman. He had a liver. I think he was short. He didn't grow. It stunted his growth because of a liver condition. I think, I'm not sure, but I can't remember how many years ago. But he passed away. And that was, of course, about two adopted African-American kids who was adopted to a very wealthy family, and just a lot of different things, you know, typical kids issues. And there was one, as a matter of fact, that happened in 1981 where it was to raise awareness too of molestation, child molestation. And there was an episode there where Willis and his friend befriended this owner of a bike shop, befriended them and invited them over. Hey, why don't we watch TV? Why don't we do this? And had them take your shirts off and be like big men. And he turned them on. He showed them porn, and so on and so forth. But yeah, so that raised awareness there. But and another thing, another TV movie that I watched that I thought was so cool. You know, I was 11 years old. I'm like, oh, I got to watch this. It was called The Survival of Dana. Yes, The Survival of Dana was a TV movie that aired, I think it was on CBS or NBC. I'm not too sure, one of the two. And it starred Melissa Sue Anderson, who played Mary on Little House of the Prairie. Anyway, she, in the beginning of the movie, there's a gang called the Roadrunners, which consisted of one girl and four guys, or let's see, about four guys and one girl. And they trashed the high school the night before. Melissa Sue Anderson's character, Dana, was transferring from Fargo, North Dakota to California. And they vandalized it, and there was a note, the teacher said, "Oh, there was a vandalism. There was a vandalization of our school last night, and nobody even suspected the road runners, which was really odd." But anyway, Dana gets there and she becomes friends. She stays with her grandmother and she becomes friends with Rona, who was a member of the gang. And she meets up with Dana when Dana was shopping with her grandma. Goes, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And she sees Rona show up. And says, "Rona, what are you doing? Here, just come on." And so she ends up getting arrested with Rona, even though she really didn't steal anything. And they get in, of course, Rona's used to the process. They're in and out. And then Dana decides she wants to become a member of the group. So it's those movies that's more like good girl from Fargo, North Dakota, middle America, Midwest girl comes over and gets with the wrong crowd. And she ends up dating the head of the crowd, which was played by Robert Carradine. And she ends up dating him, and they go in a lot of hijinks. They carjack, and two of the members carjacked 2 cars, and they took it out to this one area where they were racing and just acting goofy and goofing off, and they crashed the 2 cars. And in it, a rival gang pulled up in none other than a gold Trans Am. That is my dream car. That's why I'm changing my screen name to Gold TA 70s Chick. And the show is going to be Fort Lauderdale 1. So that's that's a new revision, a new format I'm gonna have on my show. But anyway, she becomes a member, and they actually kind of swear her in. They give her a cake, and they're all in the van singing "For He's a Jolly Good Fellow." Yeah, vans were a really big thing there, and guys with the feathered hair, you know, and one of the characters in that movie was called Skates, and he was a nice looking guy, but dim, very dim. And anyway, what happens at the end of the movie, the rival gang tracks down the Roadrunners and breaks into one of the Roadrunners members' houses, and they begin to fight. They begin trashing the place, and one of them had a gun, and her boyfriend Donnie jumped over the couch to tackle the one guy of the rival gang, and he shoots him dead. And then Dana's heartbroken. You know, then they attend the funeral, and then she's right back to her nice self. She was a figure skater, and of course she was refused to become a member of the team due to her shoplifting, the shoplifting scandal she was involved in. But she soon was able to get in, and she resumed her ice skating. So it was like good girl meets bad gang. Then becomes good again. So you should check it out. It's on YouTube. There's segments. There's like 4 segments, I think. It was your typical 1979. Oh, and it was Judge Reinhold's first acting role. And to be honest with you, his acting wasn't really up to par, but it was interesting to see him in it, in his first role, if you'd like to check that out. So that was the TV movie that I liked. And other movies, big time movies, Amityville Horror was the second top grossing movie, and that was the very first horror film I ever saw. And right after that, I'll never forget how terrified I was. And then we went over that very same night to a friend's house. Back then when it was called cable TV, I think it was still HBO, but everybody knew it as cable TV. The Exorcist came on. And mind you, I'm 11 years old. I watched that, and let me tell you, those 2 movies combined spooked me for, oh, wow, a good few weeks. I would wake up. I remember my mom taking off to the Fort Lauderdale swap shop early, because they like to get an early start to get all the clothes they can. It was, the swap shop was so different than what it is now. And anyway, I would get scared, so I turn on all the lights, I turn on the TV, I turn on the stereo to keep myself company because I was so scared. And the Amityville Horror, as you know, it was detailing the real-life family, the DeFeos, that lived in Amityville, Long Island, and they purchased the house, and supposedly it was built on an Indian burial ground. But my theory is the DeFeo family, with the shootings, Ronnie DeFeo his claim was that the house voices told him to kill his family, and that was his cover-up. And of course, he's still serving the term now. My theory is the father was so tyrannical, and the mother just turned a blind eye. And and I think there were stories that his sister Dawn was in on it. Dawn and another accomplice was involved. And they shoot, and the weird thing was they were all on their stomachs, and they all shot them in the back. And what happened with Dawn, supposedly, she and Ronnie get into an argument, and she tackles him, and he shoots her. But this is hearsay, but to me, that sounds closer to the truth. And my theory of the hauntings goes is what happened was I feel that it wasn't on an Indian burial ground. I think a lot of people, like Dana, you would know a lot about this. I don't know if there's so much as hauntings with ghosts, or certain houses contain an energy from like what went on before, and certain people either pick up on it and it all happens to them, and then other people move in and they don't experience it. Like, for instance, the Lutz family, who moved in December of 1975, began to hear voices and lots of noises, and there's flies in the window of the sewing room, which was Dawn's room. My theory is it was the energy from the family, the DeFeo family, that was haunting them. And the explanation for the flies was the sitting room, which was Dawn's room. She was really filthy. She would like leave chicken wings and all this other crap and stuff them like in drawers or under the bed, and it would produce flies. And to me, the flies were like a manifestation. And then, of course, after they fled in January of 1976, the Cromartie family moved in, and they stated they saw nothing of the sort, and it began to be a hoax. And the Lutz family signed a deal with Jay Anson, who compiled the book, over like a bottle with several glasses of wine, and it supposedly was a hoax, was all made up stories. So, and nowadays the Amityville, the house, has changed its number from 112 Ocean Avenue to another number, and it was remodeled. And there were some videos on YouTube people posted where they were filming it, and people would go by, right by, go, get a life. And the poor family, families now, after all that, the Cromartie family included, they would be bombarded with people looking like into the windows and taking pictures. And wow, that had to have been a real ordeal. But yeah, that's my theory is, and so far no other hauntings have been recorded. So there is a lot of speculation and a lot of controversy surrounding that. And the top grossing movie was Kramer versus Kramer, which I never saw, but I heard it, received a lot of awards, and I saw parts of it. It, of course, was a divorcing family, Justin Hoffman and Meryl Streep, and just your typical divorcing family. And it was really, really high praised and was the top grossing film of 1979. Other movies were Rocky 2, and it's funny, I never saw Rocky 1. I saw Rocky 2, Rocky 3, and Rocky 4, and that was it. And Rocky 2 was, oh my God, the ending was where Apollo Creed, played by Carl Weathers, and Sly Stallone, who played Rocky, they fought, and at the very last, they were both, beaten senseless. They both, at the countdown come, you see them struggling, and Rocky won by 1 second. That was intense. That was even more intense than Rocky 3 with Mr. T. But yeah, that was Rocky 2. That was really an intense ending. And there was also The Jerk, starring Steve Martin, which I still haven't seen, and I have to. Of course, I heard that was a real hoot of a movie too. And the only line I known from that movie was, "I was born a poor black child." Steve Martin always cracked me up. And there's Apocalypse Now, which was another huge, top-rated movie. I think critics praised it. I've never seen it. My hubby has it on DVD. I may watch it with him. And it was a Vietnam movie, and supposedly it was starring Martin Sheen and Marlon Brando. And supposedly Marlon Brando, he had to be blacked out because he had gained so much weight, and he and his family, they were a bunch of characters. Brando became very very eccentric later in life. That's an understatement. But and now several big year again for disco. Disco was in absolute full swing, but then it started to go south right along when new wave came to the forefront, and it just kind of faded. Disco, it's like disco was still around in the early 80s, but it was, I mean, like I said, new wave came back into the forefront, and like a lot more of R&B type songs, but disco was in full swing. And the biggest, of course, the biggest artist of the disco era, especially in 1979, was Donna Summer. And her another #1 album she had was Bad Girls. It was a 2-record set. And oh my God, I had a best friend in 1979, 5th grade. Her name was Caroline, and I just caught up with her recently on Facebook. I've been looking for her everywhere. Oh my God, we loved Donna Summer. Oh my God, we were fanatics. And both her singles, Hot Stuff and Bad Girls, both made it #1 on the charts. And they had both been in the top 5 simultaneously. So that was that. I think the only other time that I remember that being a feat was Linda Ronstadt when she had Blue Bayou and It's So Easy, both in the top 5 in 1977. But yeah, Donna Summer was a huge major disco star. And Kiss also, I think this might have killed their career for a while. They came out with the album Dynasty, which had good songs on it, but it was more disco influence. Like I Was Made for Lovin' You was number 11, almost at top 10. Phenomenal song, but it caused a lot of backlash with Kiss fans. So a lot of it, I think they sold out, and a lot of their popularity began to wane, and they didn't really come back into the forefront until the mid 1980s, and their 80s stuff I didn't care for. I was typically, of course, a 70s Kiss, of course. And that was the year, that was 1978 when they released their 4 solo albums. And who else? So the Bee Gees, of course, were still a big hit. They came out with the album called Spirits Having Flown, and they had #1 songs from that called Too Much Heaven, which was a good song, but it wasn't one of my favorites. And Tragedy was big. I love Tragedy. And Love You Inside Out was good as well. And that, was that #1? Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, it was #1 in June of 79. Tragedy was March, and I think Too Much Heaven was in 78, I think. But, and Supertramp also was not real well known, too much mainstream. They had a few albums that charted here in America. But this one was their biggest. It was called Breakfast in America. And they had a lot of hits. There was The Logical Song. There was Take the Long Way Home. Goodbye Stranger, which reminds me of, I don't know, cruising along in a car down Hillsborough Boulevard, while near the end they have that guitar solo and that jangly guitar solo, and it just fit the mood. And of course, my favorite car is the gold Trans Am, which was I think it was big in 1979, and that is my absolute favorite. Oh, I'd love to be cruising around in one of those right now. But yeah, speaking of Supertramp and The Logical Song, that's the parody song I said earlier about the gas shortage. The British band Barron Knights did a parody of that called The Topical Song, and that was a pretty funny tune. And also, let's see what else. Oh, The Knack became their debut album was a huge hit, and their song My Sharona, skyrocketed onto the #1 charts, and it was on the charts for I think 6 weeks. And their debut album went #1 as well. But after that, they just kind of went south. The bottom dropped out right away. I mean, the fad, the gimmick was over. And people, I think, were saying that they were a rip-off of the Beatles. And there was even one person, I can't remember who it was, if it was a DJ or somebody, they assembled a Nuke the Knack kit. They hated the Knack so much, they made that Nuke the Knack kit. And Also, speaking of other festivities and events, in July of 1979, and I think it was Kaminsky Park in Chicago, they kicked off a disco sucks movement. The Chicago White Sox game was being held there, and people were taking a whole bunch of disco music records and throwing them in a pile and setting fire. And the crowd got so carried away that the game had to be called off. I remember hearing about that too. And I'm like, disco's awesome. What are they talking about? And then, of course, I went on a disco sucks kick for a while when I got into bands like Led Zeppelin, who they had their very last #1 album, and their last, because due to before John Bonham's death in 1980, called In Through the Outdoor. And that album had several different camera angles. Some of the album covers were different. They had where the guy's sitting at the bar at a back angle, and there's another one where there's a front angle, and so on and so forth, which I thought was kind of cool. That reminds me of my show I did earlier in the week about the Pirates World. No, not Pirates World. It was the Skunk Ape. I have two different versions of it because I thought one didn't upload, so I redid it. And I've decided to leave them both up because they both have views, and I'm figured leave them up. And altogether, I've got 55 views on both of them. So that's kind of creative in that sense. But okay. Yeah, that was, I love the beginning of that album, In the Evening. It has that spooky, spooky vibe. And my favorite too was Carousel Alhambra, which was 10 minutes long. It starts into kind of a funky thing, and then turns more into, it gets more mellow, and it's more slow rocking, bluesy, and then it hits again to disco and funk again. It's like the tempo changes are awesome. So I remember I used to think they were from the South because Robert Plant always seemed to have that Southern accent to him, and I heard that they were from England, and I'm like, oh wow. So anyway, too. My favorite songs of that year were, oh, you did, Lee. Oh, you told Mar to come on. Hi, Mar. Hi. Oh, thank you for coming on. I'm glad you can come on. Not so nice to see you. Yeah, I'm just in the middle of it. You can catch the rest when I upload it. But yeah, we're having fun. So I was just discussing music, and I'm still discussing music right now. I had 4 favorite songs from 1979. One of them was Blondie, Heart of Glass, who had been a punk band, and they were only popular in the UK, and they didn't take off in America until 1978 when they released their album Parallel Lines. And it was a mixture of a little bit of punk, a little bit like new wave. They're more new wave, but Heart of Glass was known as new wave disco, and it was, of course, their #1 hit. That was one of my favorite songs. And of course, the Blondie fans hit them with Sellout, labeling them sellouts again because they were predominantly punk. And so yeah, that was their breakthrough, was Parallel Lines. They had 3 albums in the UK. There was their debut album, their eponymously labeled album, Plastic Letters, and so Blondie, Plastic Letters. This might have been their 3rd, not their 2nd, their 3rd, not their 4th, their 3rd. So yeah, the other 2 were in the UK that nobody heard of in America. So yeah, that one, and Paul McCartney and Wings had Good Night Tonight, which he almost didn't release. It was like a Latin disco song. Thanks, Emery, I appreciate that. It had that Latin disco feel, and that was, oh my God. I liked the beginning, the guitar, and it was like a Latin kind of. And I liked, of course, the longer version, which they played on the radio, and I have that on a disco. It's 33. It plays in 33, but it's just the single. And I recorded that when I was using my my vinyl recorder where you have the software and you record it onto the software. And I have that recorded on video. But now I can go to YouTube and do that now. I don't even need the vinyl anymore. I can find whatever I need there. So thank you, YouTube, in that sense. But yeah, that was one of my favorites. Blow Away by George Harrison was just this really nice mellow tune. reminds me of spring of that year after a nice rain and when the sun's coming up. Those three, and I liked at the end of 1979 Prince. That's when I first heard of Prince. He actually had a thanks, Lee. I appreciate that. Prince had an album in 1978 that I really didn't hear of, and I heard of Prince in 1979 when he released a self-titled album. And the song was "I Want to Be Your Lover." That was a really nice club song. Reminds you of disco still being in vogue in 1979, but this was more funk, danceable funk. And like I said before, I was born in the wrong decade. Oh my God, what I would give to be a teenager in the 70s. Oh my God, all throughout, like maybe grade school, maybe in early 70s. And then as a teenager goes on, like through it. But alas, I was only a little tot and in grade school all throughout the 70s. And I started middle school in late 1979. So unfortunately, but also another song was the Pina Colada song, Escape. If you like pina coladas. That was the very last #1 hit of 1979 was that. And yeah, it's so funny how it goes. It's bored, either boyfriend and girlfriend or they're married. I don't know. But the guy's bored. He looks in the paper for a personal ad. He sees one that he likes and responds to. So he goes to meet the lady, and it turns out it's his girlfriend, who really was the one who put the ad up in the first place. So yeah, that was a really funny tune. You can either like it or hate it, but it's kind of corny right now when you listen to it, but it's still fun to listen to. And another thing, besides new wave bands like Blondie, there's another new wave song that I liked that era. It was issued at the end of 1979 called "Video Killed the Radio Star" by a band called the Buggles, and that hit the top 40. As a matter of fact, it was only number 40. It didn't go any higher, but it did break the charts. And it was the very first song to be played on when MTV first debuted in August 1st, 1981. That was the very first song. The second song was "You Better Run" by Pat Benatar, which is an awesome remake of an old 60s tune. I can't remember who the band's name was, but it was a remake, and she did a wonderful version of that. And a lot of new wave bands coming to the forefront. And there was the artist called M that did pop music. Pop music. I love that song. To this day, I can still listen to it. And they don't play it much on the radio anymore. But yeah, that was really popular. That went to #1 on November 3rd, 1979, which was around the time the hostage crisis began. So we needed to hear some fun music then. So that, and of course, that and the long version was being played, but I had uploaded the long version on YouTube and burned that onto a CD. So that was new wave that was coming in there. And there was also rap. Rap music had begun with "Rapper's Delight" by Sugar Hill Gang. That was the very first rap song. And that was back when rap was rap and you can understand them. They had a lot of slang, but you can understand them. And then gangster rap actually was gangster rap in the 90s, where it was more the gold chains and the jackets, the hats, and the baggy pants. But anyway, I'll probably talk about something that on a topic maybe later on down the line. But anyway, it was spearheaded by R&B singer named Sylvia Robinson, who was half of the duo Mickey and Sylvia, and they did that god-awful tune "Love Is Strange" back in 1957. Baby, oh, baby. It's like, I hate songs where they say baby a lot. It depends on who sings it, really. And I can't stand it when they say baby. And she was also an R&B singer. She came out with that song called "Pillow Talk" in 1973, which really was the first song to include sexual moaning in it, but it wasn't as intense as Donna Summer's song "Love to Love You Baby," which went to #2 in 1976. That was kind of embarrassing to listen to because as a kid, I had no idea what was going on. I was 7 years old when that was released, and I would just be listening like, oh my God, there's that song again. Anyway, so that new wave and rap was coming to the forefront, like I said. And there was a debut of a radio station in South Florida too. It was called K102, and they played a lot of the hits of the day. Then they became like rock, just straight rock. Then they were just playing. They still call themselves a classic South Florida's hottest rock, when it was just like soft rock, like proto, like kind of after post disco kind of songs. And I'm like, really? And then after a while, they did play rock, but they were in competition with WSHE, which was started in 1970. WSHE was more rock, but then, and then K102 played the punk and the new wave. They kind of went through the motions, but they still call themselves South Florida's hottest rock. But K102 became Magic 102 when they did oldies, and then they were, and I'm going kind of off the track here, but that'll be topics I'm going to discuss too. In my Florida topics, I'm going to discuss popular radio stations in the 70s. And the fads, of course, were still disco fads. Well, now bell bottoms were kind of going out of vogue, and it was more straight leg jeans like Jordache, designer jeans, Jordache. Everybody had Jordache. I had to have Jordache. Everybody, Jordache, Sergio, Sassoon, and they were wore with Candy's shoes, which were like the slide clog shoes, but they had a heel, a heel, like a disco heel. And satin pants were all the rage, the disco, like what Olivia Newton-John wore in Grease, those pants, and the off the shoulder. And of course, the feathered hair was still in vogue, although it was a little bit bigger, kind of wavier, kind of like more like a, I wouldn't say a rat's nest, but fluffier. And, the gold makeup, the gold eyeshadow, and tube rompers were in. It was like a tube, you pull it on, and it had a band here, and it was stretchy. It was like a romper, like a tube romper, where it had ties. I had a couple of those when I was 11, and I had a pair of hip hugger jeans that my mom had got me, and I never knew I had. And she goes, "These are hip huggers." I'm like, "Really?" And they, of course, came down to here. Of course, I can wear them. Back then, I was 11 years old. I was 100 pounds, not even 100 pounds. So, yeah, those were in style. And the first Sony Walkman was being worked on. I think it was introduced then. And I think it didn't really become in vogue until the early 80s, maybe like 82. It was being processed then, that one. And, sneaker skates too were the rage, but they weren't good for your ankles. There's no ankle support, and you could probably fall and kill your ankle. And I had a pair when I had my 12th birthday in February of 1980. I had a pair. I thought they were so cool. I even went to the roller rinks with them. And 1979 was a good year for roller rinks. And of course, me being the nerd that I always was, the outcast that I always was, I never knew how to do all the tricks, and people would make fun of you. Oh, shuffling, and you got to shuffle. And even though I knew how to, you just go like this. And all the girls, like later on, had their combs in their back pockets, and they had the Jordache jeans. And of course, the tie blouses were in with the tube tops underneath. Even in the early 80s, I used to wear those all the time, even though I really couldn't wear tube tops at all, but I still did. Whatever, I still did. And see, the candy shoes, the sneaker skates, and those stereo headphones too, you put on and you can tune it in. And I got a pair of those for my birthday as well. So I had the sneaker skates and that, and I'm like, woo, I thought I was so cool. Those were big too back then. So, and of course, Vans were with the jacked up wheels, and no parent wanted their daughter going out with a guy that had a van, and I'm sure you can catch the drift. So anyway, I miss those times. And 1979 was a fantastic year. I mean, everything was just, I was almost coming of age, all that. And it was just a lot of fun. And I loved the 70s were just it for me. And I promised my friend Lady Peeps that I was going to do an 80s show. I'm just going to maybe do the 80s rundown in a nutshell rather than doing each year, because a lot of the years I didn't really particularly like, so I don't like describing them. Sorry for those 80s fans out there, but I will go through the music and a lot of the fads, fashion, TV shows, movies, so on and so forth. So I will be working on that. And in the meantime, I'm going to have more next week. I'm going to do some more 70s folklore and 70s culture that was popular in the 70s. Of course, I'm repeating myself over and over again. I'm becoming a little banal, however you pronounce that word, or repetitive. I'll just say repetitive. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for coming, and I hope to see you again next week when I have my Florida culture shows. I'm going to have one. I'm going to try to have one every day if I can. And I'm going to do, of course, an 80s show, and I'm just going to cover many topics. But this concludes the end of my 70s and retrospect shows. Whoever didn't catch this in the beginning, you can see it. It'll be posted sometime near the end of the day, as this takes forever to upload. Okay, everybody, you all have a fantastic Friday and awesome weekend. Bye.